two teen siblings from the 1990s become trapped in the fictional 1950s idyllic television show, the eponymous Pleasantville. The siblings, David and Jennifer, played by Tobey Maguire and Reese Witherspoon, are transported from their less than ideal contemporary home to the black and white archetypal 1950s American suburban domestic comedy. That was a lot of words. Nostalgia has been a key part in the popular resurgence of vintage aesthetics and older traditional values. Shows like Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver, and The Honeymooners encapsulated the very tropes that fondly address the social norms, traditions, and day-to-day of the American family circa the 1950s and 60s, or at least the idealized version. In Pleasantville, the TV characters are set to fix loops, episodes follow pre-planned and edited plots, and are scripted to nostalgic perfection. The arrival of the twins brings disarray to the safe and secure setting, and the town literally begins to shift from black and white to colored. The color shift signifies the awakening of new moral parameters such as sexual exploration for curious teens, artistic and creative talents for boys, and liberation from domestic labor for housewives. The only ones who remain unchanged are the town's fathers and husbands, as well as the uncolored white youth who react violently to the changing of the status quo. The overall plot is how the siblings introduce more modern ideas to the town and thus disrupt this perfect but albeit boring paradise. The brother David is a huge fan of the show, often relying on its visuals of home life and the perfect nuclear family to replace his own chaotic, less supportive real-life one. By framing white 1950s suburbia as an escapist fantasy, David is encapsulating the popular waves of nostalgia present in every era of popular culture, as well as demonstrating why the 1950s sitcom format was so popular. Sanitized, clean-cut, and not challenging of the status quo in any way, domestic comedies provided Americans with a digestible, wholesome, and conflict-free entertainment. As a result of the feel-good television of this time, we might view the past just as David does. Perfect, objectively better, because it was simpler and less complicated. The movie Pleasantville is obviously a critique of this nostalgia for the good old days and how we often oversimplify extremely tumultuous times that were very difficult for a lot of people. It also critiques the power and influence of media, but in lieu of a deep dive of that, I'll simplify it to one sentence. David feels sad because his real life doesn't look like the one on TV. His real family is distant. He and his sister argue often as, unlike her, he is unpopular and lonely amongst his peers. The appeal of the show is that he is fed a message that encourages his resentment for his life and his longing for the black and white world he sees on screen. What he envies of this fictional world can best be encapsulated by the breakfast scene.
Come on, kids. You're not going off to school without a hot breakfast inside you. Forward march.
Housewife Betty Parker approaches the kids with a homemade breakfast that puts the Denny's Grand Slam to shame. You got biscuits, toast, and pancakes. Things that you typically wouldn't eat all together at the same time, all at once. Quantity and carb-related repetition of the breakfast signifies the breadwinning father is making enough at his miscellaneous 9-to-5 office job to warrant a fridge full of food in a cosmopolitan suburban home. And in exchange, mom does her civic womanly duty of making sure the family is fed and out the house in that order. The contents themselves exaggerate upon the basic staples that make up our image of the American breakfast. Toast, pancakes, waffles, or French toast, some sort of carb. A meat protein, sausage that might look like this, bacon, or if you're bougie, turkey bacon, and almost always eggs. And if you're well-adjusted human being, with cheese. Breakfast in a symbolic sense represents the beginning of motherly duties, the first thing they do for their family each and every morning that has long-ranging consequences. Popularly known as the nation's homemaker, American chef and author Ida Bailey Allen wrote in 1952 that how a housewife served breakfast could affect the whole day for the entire family, saying, "If you will use your own goodwill and make up your mind to face the day without the feeling that the burden of the world is on your shoulders, before you know it, there will be a smile on your face, a light in your eye, and cheer in your voice to glamorize the whole family." Allen is declaring that making breakfast is an act of self-sacrifice. She acknowledges that the role of the mother is to disregard whatever stresses she is facing to cut, cook, and clean in order to make breakfast so that everyone else in this heteronormative nuclear family model can have the best start to their day. This might be a little dramatic, but I'm instantly drawn to a visual of a Greek goddess like Athena blessing her little soldiers before they go off to war, or in this case, middle school. So war. This idea of connecting breakfast to a higher, more abstract goal, almost nearing spirituality, wasn't new at the time either. There's a long history around moralizing breakfast in the United States. Breakfast cereals got their start as a part of pro-wellness and vegetarian movements formed within Seventh-day Adventist sanatoriums in the mid-19th century. A nutritionist and fervent Seventh-day Adventist follower, John Harvey Kellogg created the first flaked, the word is an important distinction, breakfast cereal out of the belief that it would not only prevent illnesses, but also other anti-godly, more bodily friendly activities. I recommend you Google that. Anyway. Though exaggerated, the breakfast scene explains through imagery the expectations laid out for mothers in this time period. To not just serve, but to overserve. And by dedicating themselves to family-oriented service, they are dedicating their lives to the kitchen. Which sounds pretty great, if that's the life you truly desire. However, during this time, Betty and her fellow housewives are rarely encouraged to explore other avenues of life outside of motherhood. In addition to fervent societal and familial pressures and intense media imagery, single women face legal discrimination as they could be denied from renting or owning homes and applying and being promoted for higher-end job opportunities due to their gender. As a consequence of all these cultural and legal rules, many women found themselves relegated to the role of homemakers. And if they did have aspirations for higher education, it was often in a convenient way to still secure a husband. It was commonplace to hear of young women attending university with a lofty course load because they were after their quote-unquote Mrs. degree and were in close proximity with young men with potentially bright futures. But what we'll eventually see from this funneling of destiny for white middle-class and up women is high levels of mental and emotional distress that stemmed from a limited future they might not have actually chosen for themselves. High levels of depression and prescription drug abuse and hostile familial environments followed many homemakers who expected a life of codependence and leisure to bring them peace and happiness. Thus, their disillusionment came from the false promise of domesticity. Ooh, title drop. So it makes sense that by the end of the film, Betty comes to understand that she isn't as happy as she's supposed to be. She stays at home not because she wants to, but because the show and society tells her to. She stops cooking for her husband and even starts an affair with the ice cream guy who's now an RC softboy. Good for her. Many women, like Betty, found themselves dissatisfied with domestic life. Some of them also found happiness, but this story is not about them. This video is about the women who woke up, made a huge breakfast for their family, and when all was said and done, asked, damn, ain't there more to life?
So many people these days, we live in the suburbs. Dave needs the car every day for business. When he was gone, I was practically a prisoner in my own home. I couldn't get out to see my friends, couldn't take part in PTA activities. I couldn't even shop when I wanted to. That's all changed now.
The 1950s were a fucking lie.
With an uneasy truce in Korea, the vanguard of 5,000 Indian troops arrives in Seoul, many of them wearing colorful native turbans, en route to Munsan to take custody of prisoners of war refusing repatriation. 15,000 anti-communist Chinese POWs and 8,000 North Koreans head for Munsan too, steadfast in their refusal to return to Red Rule, eager in their determination to remain among free men.
Show Oscar Colapso, one of the killers, now in hospital charged with murder. Torresola, another assailant, was shot dead by the police.
On October the 4th, 1957, while the Americans were still finalizing their plans, Sputnik was launched.
The Royal Navy patrols Egypt's coastline, while its carrier-based Venoms, Wyverns and Seahawks carry out their task of destroying Nasser's airfields and supporting the Anglo-French landings in the Canal Zone.
The revolution is over. Order has returned to Havana, but enthusiasm and fervor still fill the air following the final assumption to power of the revolutionary regime, now the legally recognized provisional government. Havana's ovation for Fidel Castro himself had been long deferred. These scenes show his triumphal march across the island to the capital following the victory.
While the rest of the world struggled through violent regime changes and devastating economical challenges, The U.S.'s own post-war glow could be encapsulated by the nuclear family. Coined in 1924, the nuclear family stems from the only science I remember. Nucleus, or Latin nux, for core of something, i.e., the members of the nuclear family are considered the core members of the family. A father, who you probably imagined with a hat like this one, a mother, a child, and a girl child, and probably a dog too. This was a change from the more affordable extended family model where several members of a family lived together under one roof, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory style, that was more common during the Great Depression of the 1930s. You see, World War II was an explosion of change. When the soldiers returned from war, women returned to domestic spaces, leaving their unprecedented stint as the dominant labor force in America to start the quintessential family unit that we would associate with the American dream. Smaller, more economical, and an image that was exclusively heteronormative, the nuclear family in droves settled down in financially affordable modern homes outside of cities in a place now known as the suburbs. It is arguable that in hindsight, the creation of the nuclear family was intentional, and the causes economical, cultural, and institutional. Relative to the other world powers who had suffered greatly during World War I and II, the U.S.'s loss were minimal, and in fact, the economy healed. Not only were some American businesses making bank off of selling and collaborating with both the Allied powers and the Axis powers, the Nazis, but the federal government became a lot bigger, with more jobs and more money going to privatized businesses to support the war efforts. World War II, as my high school AP teacher put it in a very, very exaggerated way, fixed the Great Depression. In 1960, the gross national product more than doubled, growing from $200 billion to more than $500 billion, kicking off what historians like to call the golden age of American capitalism. Unemployment and inflation were low, and wages were higher than ever. Oh my gosh, it must be nice. However, most of this growth was encouraged by rapid government spending, the construction of interstate highways, schools, and most of all, increase in military spending amongst growing tensions with the Soviet Union. The government spending was also used to accelerate the financial livelihoods of veterans and their families with policies such as the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944. This act provided a large range of benefits for World War II veterans to take advantage of in the newly stimulated American economy. Benefits like low interest loans to start a business, 1 year of unemployment compensation, and dedicated payments of tuition and living expenses to complete high school, college, or vocational school. The most relevant to the creation of suburbia, however, were government-subsidized, guaranteed low mortgage rates. So when you add low mortgage payments to the strongest standing economy in the world at the time, and concurrent baby boom,
1950, 21 million babies had been born in a seemingly endless baby boom.
this meant it was often most cost-effective to buy and move your growing family to a modern, spacious home in the rapidly growing suburban market, rather than an apartment in the city. Imagine that, buying a house. I'm gonna admit, it took me a couple years to realize suburbs are literally spelt suburban. Like, yeah, I'm not proud of it, but Rome wasn't built in a day. Neither was suburbia, but it sure felt that way. By the late 1930s, the Great Depression had made farms worthless. So real estate developer Levitt & Sons began buying up the potato farming fields surrounding major cities and built neighborhoods with affordable, stylish, and modern homes, i.e. the setting to all your trauma and growing pains. Suburban kids rise up. After inheriting his father's business, William Levitt, nicknamed the King of Suburbia, would increase the construction of thousands of homes in popular stylish neighborhoods all over the mid-Atlantic regions of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. Some of these neighborhoods would be called Levitt Towns. Levitt Towns? Levitt Towns. Levitt. In addition to becoming rich as fuck, Levitt and his sons formulate crafting of tract homes would influence the trajectory of urban planning in American suburbia for generations to come, not only of homes but community building in general. If you live in suburbia today, you probably live adjacent to a small but still distant hub of consumer activity, and you probably had to beg your parents for a ride or carpool with the neighborhood kid you didn't really enjoy but had to be friends with in order to get around anywhere. If so, you're living in a direct consequence of the Levitt & Sons style, where residential areas and commercial areas were purposefully isolated and distant but populated enough to become its own centralized consumer market. Malls, shopping centers, and parking lots were created to cater surrounding neighborhood communities. These Cape Cod style homes were perfect for young families. They had informal family rooms, open floor plans, and backyards. Almost all aspects of the home encouraged family expansion. expansion. And so, suburban developments earned nicknames like Fertility Valley and the Rabbit Hutch and other out-of-pocket sexual innuendos. The company's success was huge, creating opposing developer companies who would go on and create their own neighborhoods, vis-a-vis the same style. But it was when Time magazine published their July 3rd, 1950 cover of William Levitt, along with the tagline, "For sale, a new way of life," it was clear that suburbia, Levittstown or otherwise, was now a part of the American dream that would continually be advertised and encouraged. But only allowed for some. Both the GI Bill and the Levitt towns excluded non-white populations, whether through explicit rules written into the bylaws or just through implicit tactics. The education aspect of the GI Bill was a large part of why the 50s were so economically successful. Student loans and education were subsidized by the government so vets could go to college without being crippled by debt and low job opportunity. At the same time, America was the strongest economy in the post-World War II landscape, and thus these vets were given a lot of opportunities to economically succeed. But this act could only be utilized by some of the population, which meant minority applicants, mostly made up of black men, were left with little options of taking advantage of their education benefits. By 1946, only 1/5 of the 100,000 black applicants who applied for educational benefits had been registered in college. Historically, black colleges and universities received little financial support from the bill, yet were tasked with trying to admit all of the black students, but the numbers were too large for the university's underfunded programs and lack of resource assistance. I get a little somber thinking about these men who are obviously isolated from these benefits. Benefits that would have allowed them to get jobs, raise a proper family, and achieve whatever U.S. societal standard that they were literally not allowed to have. Historian Ira Katznelson argues that the laws were deliberately designed to accommodate Jim Crow, and we can only infer that the Southern politicians who are and still are resistant to welfare spending and large payouts to social services were no doubt eager to cut financial corners on benefits towards the black population in Jim Crow South. But it wasn't just the South, and I refuse to make another video that adds to the inaccurate mythos of a tolerant and non-bigoted North of the United States. The other fruitful part of the bill was to subsidize mortgages for vets to purchase homes. If any of you were alive during the financially solid year that was 2008 in the United States, you will know that when you see the words mortgage, government, subsidize, you gotta involve the banks. However, the banks and mortgage agencies were still the gatekeepers of the loan approval process, and as a result, refused loans to black people, even if it was guaranteed to be covered by the United States of America. It was a literal twofold attack, though. Many Levittown communities and other growing suburbs explicitly stated that the residences were white only. As well as a symbol of the American dream, Levittown would also be a symbol of racial segregation due to Clause 25 of the Standard Lease Agreement signed by the very first residents of Levittown. This restrictive covenant stated in capital letters in bold type that the home could not be used or occupied by any person other than a member of the Caucasian race.
We were looking for a place to buy a home. We looked at Levittown, and we liked the homes here. We liked the advantages that Levittown seemed to offer in comparison to other cities. And we understood that it was going to be all white, and we were very happy to buy a home here.
What other objections, aside from the effect on property values, do you have against the Myers?
The whole thing centers around the word integration. Well, as Mr. Myers said, because his home has been anything but peaceful since he moved in. He's got 3 children. And evidently, he feels that they will be accepted socially. And I don't feel that they ever will be. But the whole trouble with this integration business is that in the end, it probably will end up with mixing socially. And you will have, well, I think their aim is mixed marriages and becoming equal with the white. But the only way they're going to do that is by education and by bettering themselves, not by pushing in the way they have here.
Home ownership is essential to the American dream. In their 2020 article, The American Dream While Black, Nigel Chawaya and Janelle Ross explain how home ownership has been key to gaining generational wealth and how that has been explicitly denied to black Americans, saying even though the 1958 Fair Housing Act outlawed redlining, a Northwestern University study of bias in the housing market published in January found that while overt forms of discrimination have decreased over the past 4 decades, discrimination in the mortgage market showed little change from 1968 to 2016. As a result of redlining and other housing discrimination policies, by 1950, only 1/3 of black households owned their homes, compared to more than half of white households. And this lack of home ownership would further lock black Americans out of the American dream. Now, in case you didn't know, This is me. When I originally wrote this video, I was also going to include a large, thorough section about how black families have been affected by American society and how women of color aren't typically associated with the housewife concept because the housewife is associated households that have a certain level of wealth. Non-white housewives exist, but not nearly to the same degree that the white upper middle class demanded of white women. Plus, I was going to add this intense discourse on how black femininity and black motherhood under the eyes of white supremacy has been picked apart, judged, and isn't given the proper due process of explanation or understanding or empathy in our media climate. But I refuse to make my cultural heritage a subheader when the story demands a whole series, if we're being honest. So there is more to explore about black familialism that goes super well with the culinary narrative that will not be gone into detail for this video, but hopefully another one down the line. I feel that it was essential to examine the line between the American dream and those fighting for it, and those who are simply not allowed to ever cross that line, before examining the lives of those within it. Seeing the line that kept so many people away from achieving, dare I say it again, proper American societal norms allows us to see what those living the American dream had to uphold and how reality can often be disappointing. For those lucky enough to reach God's pearly white picket fences, lead a life that writer Betty Friedan would liken to a comfortable concentration camp. Which is just kind of dramatic, but what, okay. In 1972, writer and housewife Betty Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique, a book that challenged the dominant belief that fulfillment as a woman had only one definition, the housewife mother. In her book, Friedan introduces the construction of the problem with no name, a feeling of conflicted dissatisfaction she found in many unhappy but dutiful housewives. The problem lay buried, unspoken for many years in the minds of American women. It was a strange stirring, a sense of dissatisfaction, a yearning that women suffered in the middle of the 20th century in the United States. Friedan shares interviews done with other housewives as she psychoanalyzes the cultural prevalence of this problem, where the dissatisfaction came from, why it existed, and who did it benefit. Friedan's work is the reason I feel I can talk a little more critically about the role of the housewife. Throughout my first drafts, I was anxious that my tone was a little harsh and that I've been aiming my critique inaccurately at individuals or even individual women.
War between the sexes could become an Armageddon if we don't get on with our revolution. But if we do get on with it and we restructure society to make equality really possible, then I think the war between the sexes will end, and for the first time we will have possible true human sexual liberation.
Using the feminine mystique as a guide, I can see that my tone is warranted so long as I aim my critique at the social systems that force this identity and all of its implications. It is coming from her experience in her interviews with several housewives in which she describes domestic life as, quote unquote, the comfortable concentration camp. It is in these pages where she declares that the chief characteristics of femininity pushed onto her and her peers: passivity, a weak ego or sense of self, a weak superego or human conscience, renunciation of active aims, ambitions, interests of one's own to live through others, incapacity for abstract thought, retreat from activity directed outward to the world in favor of activity directed inward or fantasy. In these words, she is calling out the glaring critique of complementarism, that this heteronormative working father, domestic mother pairing is inherently unequal with the women as the submissive. Complementarism is a theological view that men and women have different but complementary roles in society. Complementary meaning combining in such a way as to enhance or emphasize the qualities of each other, while technically not theocracy. The United States and most of the Western world has its cultural and political legacy in Judeo-Christian ethics and morals. The religious social foundation and growing popularity of evangelism made another element of the white American dream known for its pious but not overly zealous white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. The white Anglo-Saxon part obviously about being racially white, and the Protestant part acknowledging some sort of my ancestors escaped the Catholics on the Mayflower back in yada 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 history. Friedan also pushes against white femininity, in which passivity and being submissive were desired traits. In order to be a good wife and mother, one has to, quote unquote, renunciate aims or ambitions. Friedan writes these words as though they were found on a prophetic clay tablet, and what her language evokes is a requirement of relentless sacrifice. When we bring it back to breakfast as the most important meal of the day, the implication being that the food you get first thing in the morning will fuel your activities, your groundbreaking milestones, important moments of social interaction, and whatever mishaps you get into. But that breakfast was made by someone who deep down might have wanted her own miscellaneous adventures and trials and tribulations, but could not. Instead, she spends her energy making sure that children are fed, their rooms are clean, and her husband's lunch is packed, all to support the activities of the family that no doubt countered the housewife's own monotonous but important duties in the home. The Feminine Mystique is a critical work that explores important contexts and narratives essential to the modern-day feminist movement, and gender in the context of traditional American family imagery. Friedan's work is effective, but not as extensive as it could be. For one, Friedan ignores the plight of non-white working-class women and their families. It's no secret that during Friedan's time as an activist and political leader, she was heavily considered to be hostile to lesbian and queer platforms of the LGBTQ movement. Del Martine, longtime activist and founder of the Daughters of the Billettes, the first official lesbian organization in the country, recalled, Betty Friedan was such a homophobe. She was so afraid of the stigma lesbians might bring to the organization. As soon as I was on the board of NOW, she was on the phone to the New York Times saying that lesbians are ruining the movement and that some of them had tried to seduce her. So yeah, I don't like that. The point is, when it comes to examining the narrative of cisgender, straight, middle class, and beyond white women, Betty Friedan is our gal. And the fact that she left out black, brown, and queer narratives is a pox against not only her, but a society that continues to devalue the narratives of BIPOC people. And even the trajectory of progress in the United States still continues to ignore certain groups.
A bourgeois feminism, a feminism that is still, unfortunately, white bourgeois feminism, which is unfortunately the most represented feminism today, and most people think of that as. But that ignores the fact that huge numbers of organic and academic intellectuals who are women of color have transformed the very nature of feminism. And the hallmark of feminism today is what we call intersectionality.
I want to focus on Friedan's examination of women as housewives and their substantial impact on the economic realities of the United States. This story is from an April 1959 issue of the Ladies' Home Journal, The Sandwich Maker. Homemaker Sarah laments on her desire to take up a part-time job in order to have her own individual income. Oh, how I yearned for a little money of my own. Not much, really. A few hundred a year would have done it. Just enough to meet a friend for lunch, occasionally, to indulge in extravagantly colored stockings, a few small items, without having to appeal to Charlie. But alas, Charlie was right. I had never earned $1 in my life, and had no idea how money was made. So all I did for a long time was brood, as I continued with my cooking, cleaning, cooking, washing, ironing, cooking. Friedan used this excerpt in the section, The Housewife Heroine. The story of Sarah the Homemaker signifies two things. The first, in Betty Friedan's time, Sarah the Homemaker had been written 10 years after another Ladies' Home Journal story called Sarah the Seaplane, in which Sarah, the seaplane, a girl who at 19 learns how to literally metaphorically fly, soars into the sky and becomes what Friedan and her scholarly generation call the new women. Women who were less fluffy feminine, so independent and determined to find a new life of her own, was the heroine of a different kind of love story. The new woman stories were heroines lauded over in the pages of Ladies' Home Journal during the Great Depression up to World War II, until we saw these stories be replaced by Sarah the Homemaker and other articles titled, Inhale, Femininity begins at home. It's a man's world. Have babies while you're young. How to snare a male. Should I stop work when we marry? Are you training your daughter to be a wife? Careers at home? Do women have to talk so much? Why GIs prefer those German girls? What women can learn from Mother Eve? Really a man's world politics. How to hold on to a happy marriage? Don't be afraid to marry young. The doctor talks about breastfeeding. Our baby was born at home. Cooking to me is poetry. The business of running a home. As Friedan posits, there had to be a specific reason, or many reasons, as to why the housewife had to come right now. Why right after World War II? The road from Sarah in the seaplane to the Sandwich Maker was traveled in only 10 years. In those 10 years, the image of the American women seemed to have suffered a schizophrenic split. And the split in the image goes much further than the savage obliteration of career from women's dreams. Before I go further, Betty sure does love an extreme metaphor. Oh my God. Friedan into noting that this continuity of womankind in America is kind of weird. Just a second ago, women were in the workplace during World War II and were taking care of families by themselves during the Great Depression. Why now? But in this colorful prose, Friedan is stating that there are bigger forces gaining from the creation of this specific class of women. Forces which I will discuss soon, tinfoil hat activated. The second significant thing about Sarah the Homemaker was its glaring view of a woman with little control over her life and her finances. The problem of complementarism lies in the inherent power imbalances in the heteronormative marriage model encouraged by Western society. The roles of men and women are not equal under the traditional complementary model, as the traditional responsibilities attributed to women or men are both important, but they're obviously not valued the same to society at large. The fact that women joining the literal political class, the group of people who make generation-defining decisions, was met with disapproval or was something worth defining as a milestone proves that our traditional expectations of women are a position of inherent disempowerment. Oh, you hear that? Camille doesn't think food is essential. She doesn't believe that starving is a thing. Of course I do, and know and believe housework is important. I also believe that culture and traditions can be greatly affected by trends that arise within family dynamics and personal issues that women would traditionally have a greater say in. But men were the ones who were encouraged to go out and work and be the sole breadwinner in a society in which money is the very means for life. Capitalism go off. The fundamental Protestant activist group, the Family Research Council, wrote in their report Complementary in Marriage, What It Is and Why It Matters, men and women have very different ways of thinking and responding that affect judgment, preference, and conduct. They complement one another, making up for another's deficiencies and accentuating one another's strength. In other words, neither gender is either inferior or superior to the other. Each is simply different. That's right, folks. This isn't your great-great-great-grandfather's misogyny. This one has equality and shit. An analogy used to explain complementarism was that men were to love their wives like Jesus loves the church, which in my mind is not equal. As someone raised in a Methodist Baptist household, I was raised to believe that Jesus loved me, but he was for sure better than me. Like man's was the son of God. So continuing that metaphor makes the wife the church, and the husband is the literal light that guides the very foundation of the wife's existence, which is nice. It's fine if that's what you want. What you get from the post-World War II family dynamic is a generation of women being encouraged and pushed to live without access to their own solo sources of income, literally creating a large material power imbalance within the marriage that breeds dysfunctionality, abuse, and dissatisfaction. Shows like Mad Men and The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel have drawn back the curtain of the glamour of the 1950s traditional family to show the cracks in suburban life and domestic norms. In Mad Men, Betty Draper is one of the best examples of the tragic compromise of the American housewife. Beautiful, the epitome of femininity at her time, but horribly depressed. Married to handsome and traditionally successful admin Don Draper, Betty is his perfect match, as Don has achieved the American dream. Financially flush, aesthetically perfect, 2 and then 3 cute kids in a nice home in the suburbs outside of New York during the 60s, these two are woefully and extremely unhappy. But the unhappiness of these two characters is a central moral point to the show of Mad Men. What is happiness? And why isn't it the thing we've been advertised to want? Betty has achieved all the cultural milestones expected of a white woman of her means at the time. When we first meet her, she has already finished college, done some modeling, married her fine but trash-ass husband Don, who makes more money than I ever will, has 2 kids and a nice home in a well-off neighborhood. She is the envy of all her friends. Her wardrobe is currently being lusted after by broke NYU students in a Bushwick vintage store, and she, well, that's kind of it for her. And her season 1 arc explores how she is still very much a miserable person when every image and idea surrounding her tells her she shouldn't. This conflict, this turmoil is unknown to her, and so her suffering is silent. Except that's not how human beings actually work. Consciously, she continues to do her duty of cooking for her family, supporting her man at company events, hosting fabulous gatherings, making sure her home's decor reflects her family's financial station. She yearns for something else. And her small moments of rebellion against her status as a housewife and mother are cynical, violent, and cruel. Never being able to continue the mental and emotional growth required to be a mentally adequate adult, Betty is immature, and in a society that views mental health the same way some of us view astrology, she is not surrounded by the language or supportive community needed to even establish her anxieties. For fuck's sake, when she goes to a therapist, some old school Freud acolyte, all of her thoughts and feelings are secretly told to Dawn, as if she's a child. Never allowed to have total agency over her life and thus growing into an actualized adult, Betty's childishness and resentment damages the relationship she has with her children. By her interactions with her daughter Sally, we see exactly how Betty's are created. They're reminded over and over again the value of their looks and encouraged to pursue acceptable but complacent and submissive passion. If it wasn't obvious, Betty Draper has the problem that has no name and has built up her view of herself to be reliant on her beauty, as she was never encouraged to nurture any other aspect of herself. Betty and Don's family unit and dynamic is an example of structural functionalism. Look at me putting my political science degree to work. Also known simply as functionalism. Structural functionalism is a framework for building theory that sees society as a complex system whose parts work together to promote solidarity and stability. Philosopher Herbert Spencer presents these parts of society as organs that work towards proper function of the body as a whole. His contemporary philosopher Emile Durkheim wrote in 1895, "If I do not submit to the conventions of society, if in my dress I do not conform to the customs observed in my country and in my class, the ridicule I provoke, the social isolation in which I am kept, produce, although in attenuated form, the same effects as punishment," which is just a fancy way of saying peer pressure. The power of the gaze of others, the fear of consequences of stepping outside society's lines, and the intense human need to be a part of something greater is what drives us to shed our individual desires and adhere to cultural norms. What compels us to bend to social norms? A higher power, the public, society, or even God. However, it is in these cultural expectations that prevent Betty from actually being a good mother that the time period so desires. She literally could not be June Cleaver because of her mental damage and unhappiness. So who profited from this unhappiness? Let me introduce you to advertising. By the time Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique, women had about 75% of the purchasing power in the United States. And of course, knowing this knowledge, all businesses and corporations proceeded with moral and ethical ways of attracting the housewife's attention. Friedan wrote, "Why is it never said that the really crucial function, the really important role that women serve as housewives is to buy more things for the house? In all the talk of femininity in women's roles, one forgets that the real business of America is business. But the perpetuation of housewifery, the growth of the feminine mystique, makes sense and dollars when one realizes that women are the chief customers of American business. Somehow, somewhere, someone must have figured out that women will buy more things if they are kept in the underused, nameless, yearning energy to get rid of state of being housewives." By the 60s, corporations had begun to dedicate 75% of their advertising fund to targeting housewives specifically. Even though most housewives were relying on their husband for money, they still had an agency on the aesthetic matters of the home and of herself. I'm saving a deep dive into the world of women's beauty products and diet foods for another video, but image for the housewife was just as important as cooking food. Okay, maybe that was an exaggeration. In Cold War kitchen, Americanization, technology, and European users, Ruth Oldenziel and Karen Zachman argued that the trajectory of American innovation was best encapsulated by the modern kitchen. They defined the modern kitchen as a culturally and ideologically technological artifact in its own right, one that intersected all major technological advancements at the time: electrical grids, gas networks, water systems, and integrated food and transport chain. They insist that a host of social actors shape all of these technological components. Kitchens are as deeply social as they are political. The kitchen was a housewife's domain, the scene of important decisions that surrounded health and nourishment, as well as family tradition. I'm not the only person whose family has a super secret recipe that has been passed down for quote-unquote generations and is now a staple at family gatherings. I'm not the only person who has an aunt who can cook so freaking well, everyone tells her that she needs to write a cookbook. Food companies would compete to establish themselves as mainstays in a homemaker's arsenal of go-to foods with the creation of cookbooks, recipes printed on the back of baking mix, and sponsorship from popular celebrities. Thus, a parasitic relationship began between the white middle-class married homes and the American market, as America sold not just products, but a capitalist way of life. To consume, to own, to buy more, and be better. A huge aspect of all advertising is staking emotions of insecurity into the buyer before encouraging a product that will appease that insecurity. An ad man interviewed by Friedan noted housewives who fell for this tactic were quote-unquote properly manipulated, a parasitic relationship indeed. Kitchen invention advertisements almost always included imagery of a housewife using their product with the promise of hassle-free and quick usage, meaning for Christmas, mom was probably getting a new stand mixer, which is obviously what she wanted. Kathy L. Pease wrote, "One of the cultural products of this new infrastructure was an explicit conception of consumer identity, an identity that was simultaneously bound up in notions of the feminine. She goes on to say that shopping became a leisure activity, something for the wives to do while the kids are at school, the men are at work, and the general hospital is recycling the same relationship drama yet again. So instead, they take a stroll around the newly created shopping center and window shop along the promenade. Ads serve to encourage the dominant rhetoric of the time, feeding off whatever zeitgeist is currently popping in society and serving to the masses what we might find to be the answer to our problems. Coffee companies like Folgers utilize emotions of insecurity of a wife's failure to satisfy their husband with their terrible coffee. Yep, their coffee.
Forget the coffee, Marge. It's never very good.
But Phil,
I'll get some at the plant.
Harold, is the coffee all right?
Mm-mm.
You mean it's as bad as yesterday?
Mm-hmm.
No improvement at all?
Mm-mm.
Harold, don't just shake your head. You've got to tell me what's wrong with the coffee.
Bad taste.
Get it? It's a metaphor for other ads were even more upfront about acknowledging the submissive position of the housewife and were openly sexist. Morphine was a common drug used to counter morning sickness, so this ad encouraged men to purchase it for their pregnant and tired wives so she can cook breakfast again. As if there wasn't another reason to watch over your wife's health. Food writer Heather Arndt Anderson wrote, "Despite a few feminist attempts to encourage women away from the stove, most wives and mothers would not dare. Images of glowing mothers lovingly preparing an array of warm foods for their tow-headed cherub dominated magazines and newspapers in the first half of the 20th century. The ads insisted that mothers use their products because you love them so much. In 1960, Quaker Oats assured mothers that the best start to the day was a hug, a kiss, and a hot oatmeal breakfast. Such ads, of which there were myriad, painted the image that a warm, comforting breakfast was a mother's love." With so many ads selling how to be the perfect mother and other ads selling how to be the perfect wife, it was only a matter of time before a brand began to sell both. Nobody dominated the mid-20th century domestic cookbook game like Betty Crocker. The brainchild of General Mills, there was no bigger cultural product readily sold and devoured by the American housewife like Betty Crocker. The brand existed as the epitome of homemaking in America, and whatever product sold by her would fit the trendy needs of housewives of the decade. Limited resource cookbooks during wartime and bacon mix for popular dinner party cakes during suburban infancy, and even introduced Hamburger Helper in 1971 in response to meat shortages and price increases. With brands like Betty Crocker's Bisquick gaining popularity in the 30s and 40s, technological advancements like the waffle iron and electric griddle were organic next steps for popular demand. It was in the 50s when a real-life actress was hired to portray Betty Crocker, transforming from a 2D mascot to a real-life aspirational icon. These shortcuts sped up time it took for a housewife, while also maintaining the contents of a full American breakfast, cutting steps and doing so deliciously. Ooh, am I a copywriter? During this time period, one can argue that women indeed had a power of the purse. And it is with this power that some scholars argue that affected the winds of meal preparation technology. It is housewives who made Betty Crocker turn from a painting on cardboard to a human icon. It's women who made Kirby, Colston, Osterlux, Pillsbury, and Kellogg household names. And it would be women who dictated the future of breakfast foods in the United States. Under the motto of Durkheim's structural functionalism, housewives benefited the nuclear family unit by her labor and the corporate markets by her husband's money. But her role was of value to the American capitalist engine as an epitomized gendered icon in Cold War politics. In 1959, then Vice President Richard Nixon and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev got into a heated debate about what made their respective ideologies greater than the others. A year earlier, both sides had signed and enacted the U.S.-Soviet Cultural Agreement, which would host cultural exhibits of the other's country, aka sliding in a little Cold War propaganda into their opponent's country. So when Nixon took Khrushchev on a tour of a model $14,000 1950 American home in Moscow, the Soviet bloc was able to see firsthand the technological powerhouse that was a modern American kitchen, containing the latest products, a dishwasher, color television, frozen meals, and Pepsi Cola with displays filled with film, TV programs, art, books, and games. The exhibit would be seen by over 3 million people throughout its time open. The tour got hot and heavy, however, when Khrushchev remembered that he didn't fucking like the United States. Apparently, U.S. Congress passed the Captive Nations Resolution just days prior to the visit, which condemned the Soviet control of the people of Eastern Europe, calling them, you guessed it, captive. From there, the most dangerous conversation in the world took place in an American Home Depot kitchen sample in Moscow. Nixon was pointing out all the sleek and advanced and modern appliances made under capitalism when the conversation turned challenging after Nixon pointed out a dishwasher. This is our newest model. This is the kind which is built in thousands of units for direct installations in the houses. In America, we like to make life easier for women, said Nixon. To which Khrushchev responded, your capitalistic attitude towards women does not occur under communism. Nixon responded, I think that this attitude towards women is universal. What we want to do is make life more easy, not my grandma is Nixon's, for our housewives. And easy had been the leading mantra for capitalist innovation. It would be the theme for food scientists and home appliances creators for decades to come. Later in 1959, powdered Tang instant breakfast drink was introduced to grocery stores as a kid's answer to, what if 10-year-olds could drink coffee? Containing only about 2% juice and involving nothing but a spoon plus kid cocaine and some patience, Tang was a favorite of institutions like the NFL and NASA, and whose popularity would skyrocket after it was reported that astronaut John Glenn drank it during his Project Mercury flight and subsequent Gemini flights. Another moral and spiritual win despite the Soviet bloc. So by Nixon pointing out that house technology innovations were meant to make life simpler for the housewife and how that juxtaposed against the USSR's perceived brute treatment of their women, he was unknowingly providing me the very, very easy way to combine all the pieces of this video. You have one part growing suburbs and consumer culture driving corporate creativity, and how the consumer culture was sustained by the image of the nuclear family and specifically the importance of the home, aka the realm of the housewife. The so-called kitchen debate showcased not just the deep ideological differences of the Soviet and American government, but how these ideologies actually affected the domestic, everyday lives in the homes of civilians. In the USSR, women were encouraged to go back to work after pregnancy, while most women who could afford to in the US became housewives. From this phenomenon, you see a shift in most products that would appeal to make the home life much more comfortable and easy for the housewife. The TV, the soap operas, this damn coffee ad, all of it was corporations profiting off of the traditional gender roles. Nixon's point proves that the image of traditional femininity and domesticity is intentional and worked to win the moral and lifestyle battle of the Cold War, while foreign intervention and hegemonic dominance fought the Soviets in more traditional methods. From the US's perspective, it's kind of a flex to imply that your economic way of life is so great and stable, so functional and unproblematic that nearly half of your adult labor force could stay home without economically bankrupting the country. It's proof that your way of life works. On a micro level, it became a flex for a man's ego if he and he alone could carry the financial burden of his whole family. For a housewife, the advertised lifestyle of leisure and stability was supposed to be enough to make women complacent. In her book, Homeward Bound, American Families in the Cold War Era, Elaine Tyler May writes that the promotion of suburban domesticity was necessary to encourage anti-communist sentiments. As the Cold War took hold, domestic containment mushroomed into a full-blown ideology that hovered over the cultural landscape for 2 decades. May provided one of the most nuanced and accurate understanding of the post-war family life and what it meant for all members of the family. On one hand saying, for a generation of young adults who grew up amid depression and war, domestic containment was a logical response to specific historical circumstances. It allowed them to pursue, in the midst of a tense and precarious world situation, sexually fulfilling consumer-oriented personal life that was free from hardship. But also saying, the home contained not only sex, consumer goods, children, and intimacy, but enormous discontent, especially for women. For many, there was no place else for this discontent to go, so it remained contained at the home. For these white middle-class couples, viable alternatives to domestic containment were out of reach. The Cold War consensus and the pervasive atmosphere of anti-communism made personal experimentation, as well as political resistance, risky endeavors with dim prospects for significant positive results. With depression and war behind them, and with political and economic institutions fostering the upward mobility of men, the domesticity of women, and suburban home ownership, they were homeward bound. But as the years went by, they also found themselves bound to the home. There's logic to this. With the world one kitchen table debate away from nuclear catastrophe, it makes sense why someone would want their home to be a place of calm and peace and moral security when the world had literally none of that. These homes were filled with war veterans who had seen the worst of humanity and eventually veterans who would fight in the proxy wars in Korea and Vietnam. Not able to control the outside world and all of its turmoils and problems, the American middle class found escapism within the home, a place to ease our anxieties, and was home to nothing but peace and content contentment. Peace meant having a wife who made all her meals, a dad who paid the bills on time, kids who didn't rock the boat by being queer or irreligious or worse, a socialist. May's work readily displays the core aspect of Cold War culture. Fear of the unknown, of what's different, fear of the potential destruction of the world, fear of rapid decline of power, fear of new faces and the disappearances of old ones. The answer to these fears would be eased by the confined but consistent family. At a cost. The cost was complacency. The fear of dangerous and unfamiliar and un-American social forces would make the American middle class complacent and would seek to halt any progression of racial equality, women's liberation, or any attempts at social reform that were deemed too radical or socialist adjacent. But as May stated, the cost was also discontent, identity crisis, resentment that bred toxic relationships within a home, and in the spirit of women who did not want their life to be all about their husband and children. In another of Friedan's interviews, a dissatisfied pregnant mother of 6, soon to be 7, laments her yearning for identity by comparing herself to her neighbor, an employed professional. "I envy her terribly," she said. "She knows what she wants to do. I don't know. I never have. When I'm pregnant and the babies are little, I'm somebody. Finally, a mother. But then they get older, I can't just keep having babies." The value of the housewife is based on family, and as children age and become more independent, the housewife's duty wanes. And as she ages, something we all have to do or else we die, the prospect of natural-born children becomes challenging, and even if they could have more, the financial reality would strain even the most comfortable of the suburban class. This is where peace of satisfaction hits. What happens when your family ages and little Timmy can start pouring his own cereal, or Charlotte gets her driver's license and can carpool to school? What's left is maintaining the home. What's left is maintaining appearances of the self and becoming the perfect consumer. When I see the Pleasantville breakfast, I see the fate for women of this generation. The expectation to wake up earlier than everyone else and create large amounts of food for everyone, and then, like Betty, raise their kids and take care of the home. And then I think of the trope that I swear I didn't just make up. In DCOMs or other teen family marketed movies, there's always something like a breakfast scene in Pleasantville where there's an atrocious amount of food, but our teen protagonist just takes a piece of toast to start his day. These scenes display the festivity noted by Friedan as quintessential to white Western femininity, and it emphasizes the housewife's dedication to her family and the willingness to make of goddamn feast. I don't think I gave this spread its proper due when we first analyzed it earlier. Like, holy shit, Mrs. Parker did not have to do all that. Like, get a plate, Spider-Man. Stop looking confused and eat. The relationship between housewives yearning for meaning and corporations trying to make a buck would eventually lead to an ironic loop. Women buy things that make their lives easier. Corporations provide them. Housewives get to finish all of their work quicker. TV shows ramp up entertainment to help fill in the hours. Housewives get bored and existential as her kids get older and her work gets easier. She's left to wonder what else is there to her life. Inadvertently, capitalist innovation encouraged the discontent, and by making life easier, made it harder for housewives to feel needed or fulfilled. It is from this discontent that the daughters of this generation, seeing the unhappiness, would jump at the chance to go to college, rebel against their stifling family values, embark at traditions in all the ways the 60s and beyond would allow them. It wasn't just cultural attitudes that limited what a woman could and could not do. There was also legislative precedent that newly founded feminist groups of this time would have to fight against. And as you'll see, the markets, aware of the new politically motivated and financially independent woman, would also mobilize food research efforts to create some of the most popular breakfast foods that we still consume today. Again, housing became another barrier, but this time for working white women. Realtors were allowed to prevent the selling of a home to women if they were unmarried or divorced. Essentially, women had very little home ownership and little opportunity to create individual wealth. The answer to years of this discontent under domesticity seemed to be clear. Give women work and the opportunity to become independent consumers. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy created a special commission on the status of women, chaired by Eleanor Roosevelt. The commission issued a report 2 years later that documented substantial discrimination against female workers and offered guidance on fair hiring practices and other policies to help women. The following year, in 1962, women's participation in the labor force started to increase dramatically. It would climb from 37% to 61% from 1962 to 2000, creating around $2 trillion in economic gains. Kennedy would then sign the Equal Pay Act in 1963, amending the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, and mandating that employers cannot award unequal wages or benefits to men and women working jobs that require, quote, equal skill and effort and responsibility, and which are performed under similar working conditions. These changes to the employment landscape meant mothers were balancing their still expected domestic responsibilities along with their employment. The answer to what we were eating became a resounding, what's the quickest to make? Companies adjusted their marketing towards children, more than eager to eat fun, fast, sugary food without any hesitancy, thus making mom's morning more efficient. There was really only one direction for breakfast foods to go. Unlike dinner and lunch, which were meals that one could argue you had time to make, even if there was still desire for optional quicker alternatives, breakfast in the modern world needed to be faster. Cereal had been a popular staple mealtime since the 1700s, but post-World War II saw brown basic health-focused brands turning a little more colorful and a lot more sugary. Cereal's new look needed a medium appropriate to capture the eyes of society's youngest. Advertising industry giant Leo Burnett was one of the first to understand the market that was working mothers and how much kids like to eat colorful, fun, unhealthy things. At the advent of colored television, he persuaded Kellogg to use cartoon animals as a mascot and thus started a trend in cereal companies using original characters on their cereal boxes. We already had characters geared towards adults in breakfast food, in the forms of Betty Crocker and Aunt Jemima. Don't worry, our good sis is gonna get her own video. And so we were introduced to household names such as Tony the Tiger, who first graced a cereal box in 1958. Toucan Sam in 1963. Lucky and his magically delicious Lucky Charms hit supermarkets in 1964. Riding the wave of the success of Frosted Flakes' 1954 debut, Kellogg launched Pop-Tarts in 1964. Advertised as a time-saving food on the go, the Pop-Tart could be put in a toaster and within seconds be ready. They also looked really, really cool, like little space pastries with its glittering mylar packaging and hyper-bright colors of frosting and strawberry filling. The packaging, plus Pop-Tart's ambiguously dessert-esque nature, was enough to grow a large youthful fan base and readily compete with the sugary and colorful packaging of mascot-sponsored cereal, while also containing enough fruit-adjacent items to convince parents that this 3x5 rectangle is a complete healthy breakfast. Seeing the success of the food science milestone that was preserving fruit without a refrigerator, other companies followed suit with their own morning pastries. Nabisco released Toastettes, and Post had already introduced Country Squares, which would eventually become Post Toast and Pop-Ups, both of which failed to leave any impact. And General Mills, aka Pillsbury's business daddy, would create an early inception of the toaster strudel with their Toast Switch. Yeah, it's so relevant I can't even find pictures of it, so it's okay, ignore it. By 1967, toasted pastries were a $45 million market, most of which belonged to Kellogg's Pop-Tarts' New World domination. In 1966, Friedan and other feminists would form the National Organization for Women, aka NOW, the country's largest group of feminist grassroots activists, with its foundation being to end sexual discrimination and establish gender equality in the workplace. The 70s saw huge strides as a result of NOW and other mobilized feminist activist organizations. One of the biggest victories from second wave feminism was the 1973 Roe v. Wade Supreme Court case, which legalized abortion, and every damn year since has been on the edge of being overturned. This decision would be viewed as a slight against religious voters along the whole political spectrum, and reactionary policies and organizations would commence soon after, but it was, to American society, a cultural milestone that directly questioned the connection between women and motherhood. Motherhood was slowly going from an expectation to an option, kinda. In conjunction with the sexual revolution, Roe v. Wade ignited the much-needed discourse on female bodily autonomy that would lead to legalization of birth control for unmarried people in 1972 as a result of Einstein v. Baird. Also that year, Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 outlawed sex discrimination in public schools and public colleges, allowing women to attend all public universities. So that was a fun year for everybody. In her 1991 book, Backlash, The Undeclared War Against American Women, Susan Faludi asserted that the 80s saw dominant political and media outlets argued that women's liberation was leading to drastically poor social consequences for women at large. Whatever achievement of the 60s and 70s were now being reported as problems for the American woman. Reports of the man shortage, the infertility epidemic, female burnout, and toxic daycare were not the actual conditions of women's lives, argues Faludi, but were portrayed by media, popular culture, and advertising as being a plague against the modern American woman. As Faludi said, under this linguistic strategy, the new right relabeled its resistance to women's newly acquired reproductive rights as quote-unquote pro-life. Its opposition to women's newly embraced sexual freedoms became pro-chastity, and its hostility to women's mass entry into the workforce became pro-motherhood. Finally, the new right renamed itself. Its regressive and negative stance against the progress of women's rights became pro-family. Whatever large progressive strikes towards expanded civil liberties under more liberal administrations like JFK and LBJ were intentionally slowed down due to Here he comes. Ronald Reagan cemented himself as a candidate to forward the new right's traditional agenda. In addition to his stellar economic plans, Ronald Reagan's 1980 presidential campaign had a strong moral component. As an actor, Warner Brothers had marketed him as the all-American heterosexual hero, and his reputation as a manly man would make his popularity with conservative America a given. I'm not going to go too deep into the political consequences of the Reagan era because we're living in them, but to quickly establish the significance of this administration for this video, the Reagan presidency was a result of the political mobilization of conservative evangelical Protestants in the 1970s, and his reign would eventually embolden the emergence of the Christian right, or specifically the moral majority, during the 1980s. The future of women under Reagan and conservatives became a battle of morals and social expectation, with anti-feminism becoming a popular talking point among politically influential televangelists such as Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, and Billy Graham. To the Christian right, feminism was seen as a force to dismantle the tried and true nuclear family model, and the emphasis on egalitarianism between the sexes read as socialists, and we obviously can't have any of that. But unfortunately for the new right and its favorite son, the trajectory of the future of women had already been solidified by one more milestone in the 80s. Toaster Strudel was Pillsbury's answer to competitor Kellogg's very successful Pop-Tart. The Toaster Strudel emerged under heavy competition. Pop-Tart sales were only increasing by the decade, and no other competitor had been able to take the toaster pastry's top spot. Toaster Strudels welcomed the challenge and arguably succeeded because they weren't trying to get the top spot, and instead proceeded to dominate the frozen breakfast market. Under the pettiest tagline ever, something better just popped up, Toaster Strudels added some much needed routine to the breakfast. Still a couple seconds in a toaster, but this time you could add your frosting as well as eat something that attained a fluffier, warmer, organic texture that is traditionally associated with pastries, while Pop-Tarts could be best surmised as feeling like a shortbread cookie. The strudel dropped in 1985 under a rising public desire for healthier options and less manufactured food. This will get its own episode. And the fluffiness of the pastry, God I hate this word, moistness of the fruit filling, all coated the toaster pastry as a genuinely healthy breakfast option. In a Fortune magazine article from the same year, Anthony Ramirez and Sarah Smith state that the creation of the Pillsbury toaster strudel can be owed to an increased desire for an easier, more convenient way to eat breakfast. Food technology owes a lot of its current importance to the growing health craze and the increasing numbers of two-career and single adult households, which demand high-quality food that can be prepared simply and quickly. Winning over the hearts and stomachs of sugar-craved children, the toaster strudel and other frozen breakfast foods were a sign that the future of breakfast would still look like breakfast, but no longer were women willing to work hours to bring it to fruition, and society would just have to accept that. As wages and salaries plateaued, while cost of living continued to rise, and recessions hit one after another, across America, the two-parent career household became the standard. Ironically enough, if we paid people reasonably to match the pace of inflation, more folks would, hypothetically, be able to stick to a one-parent income household. And certain people, I don't know who, but certain people would be able to maintain their patriarchal fantasy. But whatever. At the same time, microwave ovens, an invention that was introduced to the market in 1946 under the name Ratarange, the microwave, formerly used solely in industrial businesses, became increasingly a standard fixture of residential kitchens in the United States. By 1986, roughly 25% of households in the US owned a microwave oven, up from only 1% in 1971. What did this say about the average American household? Convenience sells. But microwaves, since their inception, were always convenient. The increase in usage signaled the cultural change about a woman's labor in the kitchen. Domesticity wasn't dead, obviously, but the pressure for women to be only housewives was dying. So, what came after the homemaker? The 90s saw the media highlighting a certain type of ideal woman who was politically aware of sexism but fighting it within the framework of capitalist success, if they were fighting it at all, i.e. feminism is dead and no longer needed. In a post-Mary Tyler Moore America, womankind had achieved a social standing to prosper in the workforce and as independent, sexually liberated individuals. TV shows and film began to reflect this shift with storylines featuring an accomplished career woman pursuing traditional feminine goals of romance, often depicted as white, slim, and with the financial privilege to support a lifestyle of their stylish caliber in a cool metropolitan city.
That's it. I'm out of here. All we talk about anymore is big or balls or small dicks. How does it happen that four such smart women have nothing to talk about but boyfriends? It's like 7th grade with bank accounts. What about us? what we think, we feel, we know. Christ. Does it always have to be about them? Just, give me a call when you're ready to talk about something besides men for a change.
And while, of course, sexual liberation and economic independence are what I would consider to be positive things, the 90s brand of feminist imagery were still without a doubt plagued by strict expectations of gender. As there's a lot we could talk about of this time period's portrayal of the cosmopolitan girls of rom-coms and television leads, I will point you towards Broe Deschanel's Sex and the City video on the end of history to learn more about post-feminism and media. But I will talk about...
Good evening and welcome to FYI. For your information tonight, we focus on a subject that has become the center of a national debate. To begin, we turn to reporter Murphy Brown.
Thank you, Jim. The American family and American values. This reporter has a unique perspective on the topic because in a recent speech, Vice President Quayle used me as an example of the poverty of values in this country and implied that I was a poor role model for our nation's youth.
In the 1992 season 4 finale of CBS sitcom Murphy Brown, in an episode titled Birth 101, the titular character Murphy Brown, an unmarried woman over 40, gives birth to a baby boy. At the same time, then Governor Bill Clinton was a Democratic nominee in the 1993 presidential election who would then win, beating the incumbent Republican President George Bush and his Vice President Dan Quayle. Now, I'm gonna just take this section from Quayle's Wikipedia because that's truly as much research as I'm interested in doing on this guy. They literally have a section titled gaffes. He gaffed so much it became a notable part of his tenure. Right before the gaff section, there's one titled Murphy Brown. Apparently, in their bid for re-election, Quayle decided to make a speech on the then recent LA riots, and he had an opinion. Instead of blaming the riots on, I don't know, deeply entrenched systemic racism and unregulated and openly acknowledged corrupt LAPD and inherent violence of the police state, he blamed it on the poverty of values that apparently plagued families across America. In the speech titled Reflections on Urban America, he cites Murphy Brown as how popular media is corrupting those values by promoting a woman raising her son without a husband. It doesn't help matters when primetime TV has Murphy Brown, a character who supposedly epitomizes today's intelligent, highly paid professional woman, mocking the importance of fathers by bearing a child alone and calling it just another lifestyle choice. I have so many thoughts. What if she had gotten an abortion, Dan? Would you be... What if she got an abortion? The whole speech is essentially aligning the LA rioters, who were mostly black and Hispanic, with feminists and the Democratic platform on progressive family politics, and labeling them all as morally corrupt. The Republican platform of economic conservatism found home in the notion that fatherless homes were not financially healthy enough to survive without relying on support, aka handouts from the government, and thus creating an army of welfare queens and a generation of children growing up under and eventually voting for a big government. Quayle's attack on Murphy Brown, and by extension single mothers, highlight another of the many inconsistencies we see in critiques against those who stray from traditional expectations. The goalposts for women have only moved enough to allow a successful career, but in a strict bipartisan political climate still reeling from Cold War era consequences, traditional family values were still viewed as a matter of the state. And while women getting jobs became normalized and necessary for the survival of some families, dramatic directions from conventional family structure still carried gendered stigma and consequences. These consequences can be seen in how we, in the current day, describe sexism of the 90s. A decade of bitchification. In 90s bitch, media, culture, and the failed promise of gender equality, journalist Alison Yarrow defines bitchification as when society or media reduce women to their sexual function in order to thwart their progress. We can best examine the consequences of women encroaching on male-dominated spaces with the most publicized women figures of this decade. Yarrow explores the stories of Tanya Harding, Monica Lewinsky, Anita Hill, Janet Reno, and Nicole Brown Simpson. All famous women for different reasons, but shared the common judgments that only come from sexist scrutiny. That they were bitches. The public shame of individuals like them were a reminder to women everywhere that it didn't matter if you were a political figure, a complicated individual, or literally victims of power imbalances, harassment, and murder. You would be met with the fury of the masses, painted broadly with just enough details for the casual viewer of your life to deduce that you are and should be treated as a bitch. Irregardless of the consequences women individually faced, corporations were still financially thriving off the modern-day family structure. By this time period, we see more breakfast foods aimed at children being able to make it themselves. We get the popular tradition of the Saturday morning breakfast routine, of popular cartoon shows, and sugar-heavy cereals. A tradition stemming from the waves of working mothers who, on their day off, actually deserved a day off and would outsource breakfast duties to their kids with items like cereal or Pop-Tarts. Earlier, I mentioned Leo Burnett and his mission of making cereal dominate television marketing. The Saturday morning cartoon, where kid-oriented breakfast commercials found themselves squeezed ever so conveniently between much-watched TV staples such as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Power Rangers, and Yu-Gi-Oh!, is Leo's legacy. New, more adventurous innovations began to pop up from breakfast manufacturers trying to take advantage of what was literally a gold mine of guaranteed ad viewers. Oatmeal swirlers encouraged kids to play with their food by squeezing flavor packets on a bed of box. Just add water oatmeal. Bagel Bites gave children permission to literally eat pizza for breakfast. And Oreos and Cookie Crisps were basically just cookies. Think, what did you eat for breakfast today? Was it something that came frozen in a bag and toasted, baked, or microwaved? Was it a sugary cereal filled with Red 40 and other outrageous levels of stuff? A cereal that you started eating when you were in diapers, but even today it still brings warmth to your belly. Was it just coffee because you're part of the chosen few who can't handle solid foods first thing in the morning? You poor souls. Regardless, whatever you ate today is political. That bagel is political. That Pop-Tart, that quick tangerine, is the result of political forces. Now, when I use the word political, you might quickly associate it with the word politics and thus politicians, voting, campaigns, or any other active pursuit of power and the use of power to influence society, which is fair. However, the definition I think of in its most freeing form is this. South African anti-apartheid activist Adrian Leftwich defined the word political through an extensive lens that contains every human social interaction and labels it as political. Politics as present across the sphere of human social relations, while the limited view, the one I just used prior about government and such, restricts it to certain contexts. In his book, What is Politics? The Activity and the Study, Leftwich wrote that politics compromises all the activities of cooperation, negotiation, and conflict within and between society. And I agree. Everything you ever done or will ever do is political. Where you live is the result of grander forces and thousands of years of human conflict. The music you listen to and the other art you engage in that seeks to disrupt society, and what you eat. What laws oversee the farming industries that made your gallon of milk skyrocket to $1 more? How come sauerkraut had to go by Liberty cabbage during World War I? Why are Subway sandwiches allowed to exist and be sold for human consumption? The food we consume and all aspects of it are political because they are either the result of monumental social changes or a sign of change to come. It's not lost on me that the well-known slogan used to this day, "the personal is political," actually came about during the student movements of the second wave feminist movement in the 1960s. The idea that women were unhappy with their limited lot as housewives might seem like a personal issue, but politics is what put them there, and politics is what got them out. Politics being large-scale radical ideas being injected into the culture to cause debate and eventually push society to move towards a different world. Politics being actors from Friedan and Beauvoir exposing these ideas to a massive audience, but also young women pursuing college degrees at a newly gender-integrated university. When I use the word political, I am very simply defining it as people in motion. People with wants, desires, fears, and ambitions. People like mothers, and the motion is how their lives were defined by the concept of breakfast, but also how their lines defined it. Even in 2024, these two are still very, very connected. What a mother makes for breakfast today is diverse, and arguably it always has been. I hope it was kind of obvious by now that most of these ideas were simply just that, ideas. Most of these vague concepts of womanhood or familyhood or the American breakfast are all expectations rather than norms. During the 1950s, only about 60% of children spent their childhood in a male breadwinner, female homemaker household, which is a lot. But you know another number which is considerably a lot when you're talking about people? 40%. Still pretty significant. For those who weren't a part of the thriving middle-class two-parent household, many lived in poverty, as the poverty rate then was almost twice as high as it is today. Another thing twice as high, teenage pregnancy rates, situations which would usually mean children were raised with the help of their grandparents. And every two-parent household can easily become a single-parent one through divorce or death, which would have been very common. Media in general today has done a better job of showcasing family in all of its variety and sometimes ugly glory, and still showing that these families, as non-ideal as they may be, are still valid and real. Except you, Life with Derek, y'all are weird. And fortunately, some of this media and audiences are unafraid to point out that these quote-unquote differences are symptoms of the systemic issues that pressured everyone to be in a nuclear family. Homophobia and transphobia that permeate so much of our society is the very reason that we have found families, units of non-biologically related LGBTQ plus children and adults who, abandoned by their biological families, choose to take care and create a network of support for each other, even though these bonds are not given the same tax or medical benefits that come from being recognized and approved by the government. Advertisers have also adjusted their tactics. Half of all marriages end in divorce, which means you have a lot more single-parent households, and because about 80% of single-parent custodians are mothers, you now have more food advertising to mothers with images of kids making it themselves. This also works for socializing children to pursue independence at an earlier age. As Art Anderson wrote, that's still a lot of power, really the lasting effect of breakfast as being the first meal that kids do learn how to prepare themselves. It's best to recognize that what determines what a mother can make for breakfast is more about their lifestyle rather than the love they have for their children. Moralizing component that was so popular with Quaker Oats before has now been replaced with repeated use of the words instant and heart healthy. And not to generalize, but also to kind of generalize, we are all tired and broke and low on some sort of vitamin, so it makes sense that modern food trends with breakfast are emphasizing not just how fast these breakfasts can be, but also how beneficial to your health they can be. You have the popularity of meal prepping on social media platforms, smoothies with fresh or at worst frozen fruit, overnight oats that mix tried and true breakfast veterans such as oatmeal and make it meal preppable, and according to one of my friends, extremely delicious. I greatly disagree, but whatever. And avocado toast, which, yes, is still a thing, and its popularity in being tasty, versatile in taste, and because avocado has had a consistent and almost scary run as the most advertisable superfood of the modern day healthy food craze. We're really seeing the conclusion of the earlier health crazes that started at the dawn of the 21st century, which was often bundled with the weight loss craze to some detrimental degree. Frozen food, with a big emphasis on organic labeling, low sugar, no preservatives, especially in food targeted towards children. If it's pre-made or frozen, it might be plant-based. Another label that promises you that your tofu bacon, still filled with its share of preservatives, is just a tiny bit healthier than pork bacon, while also appealing to the more recent consciousness of the harms of the meat industry and its effect on climate change. And if you're still eating carbs, it's now protein-packed, not just some common waffle or basic pancake. They're high fiber, high protein, and they're gonna have you stinking up whatever room you're in, but you'll feel stronger. Not that you asked, but I just bought a pack of Jessica Alba's fruit juice a week ago, and it lasted about 6 hours because it was basically diet water with how little sugar it had and how low in calories they were per juice, because they are indeed made for children ages 3 and up. So I went to town on it, and in a strange way, isn't this all Upton Sinclair's legacy? The modern health craze and its valid points have brought another round of awareness about what we're actually eating. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this because you guessed it sounds like it deserves its own video. But with how much wellness, both mental and physical, have been dominating social media conversations and are always in the news, it makes sense that manufacturers who have historically prioritized aesthetics and basically getting your kids addicted to their shit are now making shallow to some serious efforts of combining health and speed. Two things that some food scientists think can't go hand in hand from a mass production giant like a Kellogg. Advertisers and corporations will always be bastards, and convenience will always sell. But now the guilt isn't about you not loving your kid enough to make something from scratch. Now it's you don't love your kid enough to look out for their health. If you're gonna cut corners, cut them healthily. Pillsbury. JK, I need to make this clear. Pillsbury did not say that. That was a joke. That is not a real slogan. I just made it up. I think this is all protected by freedom of speech or something. It was a joke. It is a joke. It's a joke. I need to reemphasize so it kind of brings us back to the I home make my family's food from scratch, and the potential for some mothers to use that as a superiority chip rather than a choice that they might be more physically and financially able to make. Some families live in food deserts where it's cheaper to hit the McDonald's drive-thru in the morning and commute for everyone's meal because the parents have to be out of the house by 6 a.m. and they work late or something. I don't know, there's a bunch of reasons. Public support of more schools providing not just lunch but breakfast have increased in the last years because families, especially single-parent households, need more help. Then there are some families that are doing quite literally okay day. When I was younger, I was a babysitter, and sometimes I would babysit a bunch of kids. These kids came from very well-off families that would fit the nuclear family idea. This meant moms or nannies dropping them off in Mercedes and other fancy car names I don't want to pretend to know. And these kids would have their packed lunches that gave me a clue of how parents of that particular social circle were operating for their kids meal-wise. The children, unrelated to each other, would come in with uniformed lunches of bagels with cream cheese schmear and a fruit-based jam. I asked the kids why they were all synced up like that, and one of the kids mentioned Pinterest boards shared by their mom. I was taken aback. The meals were all very similar with the same base foundation of bagel, fruit, and maybe like a string cheese and a little juice. Even the lunch boxes themselves all looked very similar. Updated mid-2010s cubic boxes, personalized with the child's preferred color palette and sticker decor, with individual compartments of varying size and a clear plastic cover. Reusable boxes or elevated Tupperware. And please just take my word for it. Please don't make me log back into my Pinterest account. Please don't make me log back into Pinterest. And the kids, they loved them. I would see some kids come in with the same bagel setup every day for lunch and be impressed that they would, with some encouragement, eat their food entirely. It was when I asked what they had for breakfast where diverse answers were given. I don't know what a 5-year-old would want at a Starbucks, but yeah, some of them stayed at a Starbucks. I heard cereal, mom or dad made them eggs, another said a frozen something. It's almost like, I don't know, kids don't even need to eat crazy prepared meals in order to live a healthy and well-loved life. But still, I asked, sweet bagels, children, at lunch? Not even like a savory type with ham or cheese or something? And they were like, yeah, we like them. And honestly, at the end of the day, that's all there is to it. And it's because of those kids that I, at my big age, feel confident that I can continue to eat my morning pizza and midnight cereal without a care. Even the kids know that at the end of the day, all of this shit is made up. And what matters is that they like it. And I don't know a more beautiful and poignant way to wrap this up. As I completed this video, I realized very quickly that I didn't want to make it that type of video with that type of conclusion. That being, through consumerism and gainful employment, well-off white women were gifted the illustrious toaster strudel and other civil rights freedoms. It was more of me thinking really, really hard about just how connected breakfast is to us in society. I could have done this video on the breakfast is most important meal of the day plot line and how that only came about via advertiser lobbying efforts. And sometimes I wish I did because it would have been a much shorter video. The general conclusion is that what we eat is political. Whether you like it or not, food and the role it plays in every society and every person's life is a consequence of human action that might be negative or positive, like Easter chocolate bunnies. I don't actually know if Easter chocolate bunnies has a bad origin story. In fact, let's just say it doesn't. It's completely wholesome and cute and that this metaphor sticks, and I can move on to the next point. This whole video started from an image, an idea, the large exaggerated American breakfast that when I bring up to my friends, they scratch their chins before being like, oh yeah, that one. And for some reason, breakfast buffet trope is not an actual trope researched and labeled on the most important site on my internet, TV Tropes. And yet I can look up articles, even Reddit posts citing this very specific phenomenon. You know of it, I know of it, it is known. The implications of the image are built into painful and strong ties to strict gender norms in the United States. An exaggeration, but still an expectation or at least a goal women must pursue. The 80s and 90s are a great example of the fact that whatever political gains are made, they can always be taken away. And life for you and others can be upended. Roe v. Wade is gone. When I first started writing this video back in 2020, it was here. And now materially, there are birthing people who may have gotten pregnant for a multitude of reasons who will not be able to easily and safely terminate their pregnancies. In the current zeitgeist, gender and the conversation on it have been so conducive to a healthier world, not just for women or genderqueer folks, but even men. Realizations about how the pressures of masculinity have harmed generations of men to be violent or suicidal and emotionally stunted are happening on social media platforms like the one we're on right now. It does, however, seem to be a struggle in today's current climate about who's leading these conversations on men's mental health. But at the core of most of these problematic communities are men seeking help after dealing with a life under the pressures of toxic masculinity. Like I always say to my friends, not to public, but incels are wrong, but they're not completely wrong. Walk with me, walk with me. Because men are indeed ranked by traditionally masculine traits, such as size, strength, and financial economic capital. But to blame women? Huh?
I'm like, what do you say fuck me for?
Not, the the patriarchy. Like, y'all are so close, so close. There are also plenty of creators who have much more productive takes on these communities, and you should definitely check them out, or at least send them to that one friend you have who definitely needs to watch these. Please, I could have made this video about the false promises of masculinity and what we as a society tell men to do and how to act and what we sell them, what we promise men if they don't cry and don't order fun pink cocktails and don't communicate their emotions and don't view women as people, and how all of that is a lie too. A lie that truly isn't worth any of the bullshit that they or we who aren't men have to deal with. So long as we rightfully continue to question gender and its implication on us as people, there will be those pushing for a regression. Folks who see the world of volume-addled, unfulfilled mothers and think that's what we should continue to be. They'll outlaw abortions and gender-affirming treatments, turn conversations of gendered violence into rhetorical thought projects rather than serious concerns that require action. They'll promote to their audiences that people who step out of line are not just weird, but dangerous. Or at best, they'll make TikToks calling for the dawn of the trad wives, and then we'll have to watch as women who make money from telling other women that feminism is evil and harmful, and even though feminism is the only reason most of these women can do just that? Is this what The Matrix was about? I've seen so many great videos on trad wives. Here are some that you should also watch for further dives, but I will say, the same way that the TV shows, ads, and huge breakfasts that encourage more women to perform the 1950s housewife image to promote a capitalist way of life during the Cold War, the trad wife and return to domesticized womanhood content creators are also encouraging a way of life that specifically goes against the grain of a significant vein of Gen Z pop culture. It isn't a coincidence that a generation that talks so loudly and proudly of not dreaming of labor are getting fed content of women promoting the domestic space as a space of leisure, when in reality it was anything but. It's also no coincidence a majority of this content is about food creation on the most popular social media platform in the world, usually featuring stylized outfits and hairstyles, because what else are we on the internet for if not for food and looks, which sounds like another video. And the idea and arguments will be fed. They'll be cute, idyllic, and even comforting, but it will also be a lie. They'll call your own depths to self-exploration and liberation an attack on family values, all the while cutting costs of public school funding or voting against children's tax credits. And this goes for all the ideas and images that will try to convince you that the only way to be is something inherently harmful to yourself. Again, I'm gonna just say this. If you want to be a housewife, be a housewife. If you want to be a housewife, be a housewife. Let's use the word consuming in a literal and metaphorical sense. Economically buying things, but philosophically buying into something. Consumerism in both ways will not free you. No matter what direction the winds of society flow, consumerism is always going to be there to profit. The house always wins. Regardless of our happiness or unhappiness, someone else will profit. And I guess if there is something to do about it, it rhymes with revolution. I'm not advocating for this. I'm not advocating. I'm just saying if there was hypothetically something to do, so I don't know. Honestly, I don't even have much to say about this. It's just a shitty concept I wanted to point out and I needed to get out of my system. I think this, dare I say, propaganda will only intensify in more slick ways, because now more than ever, I feel we're all in on the joke. Like we know it's up. Even Mick Jagger made a song called Mother's Little Helper, referring to the dependency of suburban housewives on tranquilizers to get through their days. And if he of all people can make this solid social commentary in E minor in 1965, then you and all your internet access definitely know. We saw Mad Men. This show was an incredibly popular success. Like, it was massive. Every year they swept the Emmys. My mom liked it. I still call these two Betty and Don when they pop up in other shit. It ended almost 10 years ago and people still talk about the show as a highlight of the golden age of TV. That means millions of people watched this show, watched Betty's miserable self, and for the most part understood what was wrong with her and was like, wow, sexism is clearly bad. Imagine watching this show and knowing what these two got up to into their lives and being like, yeah, this is the right way to live. Like, this isn't luxurious, it's depression. And there's more media about the truth, like the Stepford Wives, which isn't new at all, but I just watched it, so. And the fact that people want us to return to this is wild. Again, just a reminder, if you truly want to be a housewife, or dare I say, house husband or house partner, go for it. But there's a reason the phenomenon is called trad wives, and it's very clear about its target demographic. It's more clear that as people continue to queer gender and sexuality norms, we will only get more and more pushback from political actors and individuals. It's still incredibly common for LGBTQ+ youth to be the victims of violence as well as suicide. And for some reason, birth control is now back on the table of discussion. Like, things are not only getting weird, but they're getting dangerous. We see political actors, groups, and parties utilize restorative nostalgia of the United States and its history. They desire a return to the white picket fences of Levittstown, traditional roles for husband and wives, and when you could buy the latest washing machine for $2 and 3 blueberries or whatever metaphor old people like to use. They desire a type of comfort that was built on so much pain. And I have to say this, the easiness of two genders, Adam and Eve, housewife and working husband, is not only not real, but it's not worth the suffering of anybody. Shit, the women who make it their jobs to tell girls to not get a job can't even follow their own tenets, and if they can't, how do you expect me to? And you know what? Who can blame them? If their antiquated thoughts on womanhood and them propagating those beliefs gets them out the house and a paycheck, then shit, maybe that's what they need to do. But it's pretty clear that if even they struggle to live up to these beliefs, then it's not healthy or natural to live your life under such a strict interpretation of something as expansive as gender. Betty Draper's pain was that while in her role to be the silent and diligent Stepford wife, she knew and believed that she was capable of being so much more. Because of this dissatisfaction, she was not a good mom. She made breakfast every morning but couldn't form consistently healthy ways of communicating with her children. Her potential to be anything, really, ironically, even her potential to be a good mother, was capped before she was even born because her ecosystem prioritized her as a wife, then somewhere down the line, a mother, and then eventually, somewhere even further down the line, a person. It's almost like it's not about being good so much as it's about looking good and some tinfoil hat on, big overseeing power that likes to control people, having its control over you.
Evolution.
But also, that's what gender norms do too. They prevent potential. They minimize our personhood, and they take this huge wide world and cut it in half before we even have a name. Falling in line will not free you. That's why I specified the 1950s housewives, because most of these women did what they were supposed to do. Technically, they followed the notion of American femininity. They were promised that if they acted like Ida Bailey Allen, remember her, and June Cleaver, Beaver's mom, they would be happy or at worst comfortable. They were fed ads that showed perky, beautiful women smiling ear to ear as wife and mother and gleefully making a feast every morning. Shows featuring their favorite actresses thriving as spoiled domestic servants. And the reality of the situation did not match the abstract concepts of what motherhood was supposed to look like. Society offered small wins and temporary solutions. Not feeling desirable anymore by your husband, it's your fault. So buy this lipstick, buy this home workout machine to get a smaller waist, but also make sure you don't sweat because your husband will hate that. Women aren't supposed to sweat. What's that? The economy is expanding faster in a globalized post-war timeline. Well, prices are rising and payments stagnate. Okay, you can get a job, but make sure it's like a cute one, like selling makeup or kitchen supplies. And if you must be in an office, make sure you're working for a man, but nothing too commanding. Be his secretary. Take his notes, organize his schedule, and you might be sexually harassed, but that's okay because we haven't outlawed that yet. And when we do, eventually, maybe one day, I don't know, it'll be really, really hard to bring it up against your also male boss and superiors. So your best bet is to just deal. And absolutely make sure you don't make more money than your husband. That's not your job, okay? Happy yet? Oh, you don't have time to make breakfast anymore? Something about it taking time and kids hard to deal with in the morning? Okay, it's cool now to make instant oatmeal. We've approved that, okay? Pre-cooked eggs, that's fine. Oh, that's not fast enough? Here's some Pop-Tarts. Yeah, your kids will love them. They'll still love you because it's cool now. It's fine. Wait, what's that? You haven't had the time to clean the house like you used to? Okay, bet. Introducing the Super Sucker 2000, the latest in vacuum technology. It'll cut your usual time in half, freeing you to, well, I don't know, whatever you do when you're not cleaning or cooking or working. But whatever you also do, do not dissociate and contemplate existential dread and how you've never achieved any latent childhood dreams or ambitions because, well, you never tried. You thought of college for a while, but most of the good ones were male only. And then mom encouraged you to go to secretarial school, but mostly because it was near a medical college and she always wanted a doctor as a son-in-law. And now she has one and you have a doctor husband and 2 kids who are, they're okay, they're fine. They're kids, let's be real. But they're your whole world. And when your husband's not home and then when they're not home, yeah. Wait, we forgot shopping. So you go and buy yourself something nice and then, oh, okay, that was fast. Well, don't think about it too much. In fact, don't think about it at all. Here, take some Valium and hopefully if you take enough, you'll eventually feel nothing. You might have already gone on your Pleasantville experience with gender or any of the other huge concepts that make up your identities. You may have confronted these thoughts, maybe went into a little pocket universe to explore creative scenarios, as well as cosplay as an omnipotent being in a land far, far away. But maybe you're still on the fence. Maybe you've made a certain choice in life that was either consciously or subconsciously affected by your gender. It's taken me about 3 years to finish writing this script, editing this video, and have the courage to put this video on the internet because, quite frankly, y'all scare me. I'm a daughter of the internet age and the age of social media. I know how women are treated for existing, but especially having a political opinion on the internet. I see my favorite YouTubers deal with valid criticism, but also sexist bullshit, and while both make me nervous, only one of them is changeable. I can always get better at video essays. Usually most societal thought and action emphasizes broad change on a systemic level, but I'm realizing that I truly have nothing to say about how society can change without addressing the changing that has to happen within ourselves as individuals. I'm an individual. I am a person, and the only course of action I can even feel comfortable to say with any sense of authority is from that of an individual who has struggled a lot with femininity and what the world has to say about it. Norms, good and bad, helpful or kind of stupid, are somehow always going to exist, at least for the rest of my life. Shit, I'm writing this part right after coming home from the gym because frankly, I kind of want a fatter ass. I don't know, I'm sorry. But even that's because I'm acutely aware of beauty norms and bodies and understanding that on some level, no matter how many mantras I do, the world will reward a desirable aesthetics while also somehow managing to punish me. Deep down, I know that a more desirable feminine body won't stop me from feeling a little broken. If I somehow achieve this goal of a perfect posterior, there will be the anxiety of maintaining it and the subconscious disappointment that no matter how educated I am, how strong I feel about myself, and how proud I'll be of my other more substantial achievements in life, I'll still have this little voice in my head telling me I'm not enough. I'm not doing it right. The it could be being a human being, being a girl, or just being myself. And I have to ask honestly, will I ever be enough for myself? Will I ever be like Tobey Maguire? I forgot his character's name at this point. And constantly be trapped by bullshit expectations I see on the screen, whether it be TV or an algorithmically friendly TikTok. Will I ever just be able to just be? But this has all been very negative, and I think there's still room for hope and positivity. Positivity that we can feel on a personal level. When someone is brave enough to step outside of the safety of perceived norms, willing to venture away from what has been taught to us to be right or wrong, and beats the odds against them that policy and stereotypes have all but cemented. It may not change the world, but it can change someone's world. I remember a time when I went to this private school. I was around 12 years old, and my tuition costs about $45,000 a year to go to. And I was obviously a scholarship student, of course. It was pretty obvious to anyone that I didn't belong there. I didn't live near the school like other students. In fact, I lived about an hour and a half away from it. A whole major metropolitan transit system laid in between me and my school. And I had to take that transit system every day to and from for 2 years. My mom would wake my brother and I up around 5 a.m., pick up something from McDonald's, or if we woke up in time, some Pop-Tarts or another quick and easy food. Sometimes after dinner the night before, I would see my mom in the kitchen cooking bacon or scrambling eggs and making them into little sandwiches or pre-cutting bagels so the morning could be less fussy. After breakfast, which was always eaten in the car, she would drop my brother off at a Starbucks outside his school, and he would attempt to complete whatever homework he had left or read a comic book with some music while the Starbucks workers were just opening the shop. My mom and I would continue to venture into the city, the big barrier between my neck of the woods and my school. She worked in the city, so we drive to a parking lot and she dropped me off at the nearest metro, making sure I had enough money for my train card, then head on to work. I would take my train 7 stops to another station in the obviously nicer part of town and wait at a Panera Bread, and if I had extra money or we skipped breakfast from home, I'd buy something from there. My go-to was an Asiago bagel with eggs and provolone along with a strawberry banana smoothie. I'd stay and eat until a school bus came by and picked me and the local students up for school. She and my brother did this for 2 years, all because when blank school accepts you, you go. When opportunities come, you take it, even if the opportunity is long and miserable and completely not for you. But I couldn't get mad. In fact, I'm more upset knowing that my family was making this sacrifice for me, only for me to be so unhappy at the school. But my mom was willing to wake up early as hell to make sure I got a really good education and a really good opportunity and to do things that she wasn't able to do. And while I, as an adult now, realize that a lot of what this world dictates as success is bullshit, that doesn't change my appreciation and love for my mother, who's done so much to make sure I had everything I needed to succeed. My mother left a marriage that was, to put into a word, bad, and got her kids out of a situation that was pretty terrible at times. And it wasn't easy. In fact, it was really, really hard and scary. And I can only imagine her anxiety. Could she take care of 2 kids by herself? Did she wonder what the neighbors would think, her friends? You see, it wasn't just a divorce, it was a total removal of a terrifying force. And she left it. And even though it was scary and unfamiliar territory, it was worth it. To be a woman without a husband raising kids without a father, it's not exactly society's ideal at all, but it was worth it. Just because your personal choices and journey to have happiness doesn't change the world or isn't making an obvious dent in all the problems of society. It can make your world and the people around you so much happier and stronger. Being raised by someone like her is the reason why I am who I am and why there are things that I will never tolerate for myself. My future has been shaped by that woman who's raised me, and she's made me stronger. And my breakfast wasn't prepared by a glamorous angel wearing an apron. It was tossed at me by a pantsuit wearing mom of 3, if you include my dog, who was visibly very tired. There weren't 9 different courses or a wasteful amount of options. We didn't have money like that. And yeah, it was cooked the night before, wrapped in foil and sometimes staining the interior of my mom's Honda. My favorite of her many creations was the sandwich. It has no name, but when I think of a sandwich, this is the sandwich. I'll explain why in a second. First essential piece of the sandwich is the very specific maple sausage from Johnsonville. The same sausage my grandma would use when she made breakfast. She cooked them to the darkest they could get without being fully burnt. The skin falling off in places, but adding a tasty, unexpected layer of crunchiness, while still retaining the juicy flavors we look for when we seek out a sausage. Then she'd crack an egg, add it to a bowl, scramble the yolk up, and add an eyeball of milk, just a little to make the eggs fluffier. When picking your cheese, because we're well-adjusted human beings, make sure it's shredded. During the infancy of this sandwich, meaning the first couple of tries as the final evolution took shape, my mom really liked using block pepper jack cheese, which was a little off considering the pepper jack melted slower than the eggs could cook, leaving blocky, lumpy eggs, which if that's your thing, go ahead. Eventually, she moved on to mostly using shredded yellow cheese. After adding salt and pepper and maybe garlic powder, depending on how you're feeling, add the egg to an oiled pan and do a basic scramble till you get a fluffy, cheesy, and important, a little crusty on one side of the eggs. The crust is for cohesion. It should look halfway between scrambled eggs and an omelet. A scromlet, no. Take 2 slices of honey wheat bread, toast them slightly, not necessarily burnt unless you want that, I don't know. Then you're gonna add a layer of your favorite jelly, which will obviously be grape because up until 2005, I thought that was the only type of jelly that existed. My world has since expanded. Take 4 sausage links, really 5 because by now you've eaten one, the cheesy scromlet, the grape jelly toast, and boom, a sandwich. The reason why this is an item of love for me is because I was strange as a kid. I was the only person in my family who didn't like bacon at all. My world has since expanded. So routinely, for the rare Saturday morning breakfast made by either my mom, my great aunt, or my grandma, I'd have to fight my way through eating bacon. Or give it to my brother, who loved bacon more than anything on earth, or my dog, who's a dog. So the Johnsonville maple sausage was my family's answer for me, specifically, to get me to not just eat breakfast, but to love it. This sandwich is to be eaten on rare occasions because cholesterol, but also it has too many good things in it. For me, at least. It has become the answer to some of the worst hangovers I've ever experienced. But before it was for hangovers, it was proof of the collective efforts of my family to think of me as a person, the lone non-bacon eater in the family. And thus, the sandwich was made. Again, this was a rare treat, a labor of love, and something very special. But sometimes, when my mom couldn't make the sandwich, or toast, or anything tasking, and she was tired from her long days, short nights, and early mornings, sometimes I'd get to eat my second favorite breakfast of all time. A toaster strudel. An apple toaster strudel. You are my special angel, sent from up above. The Lord smiled down on me and said, an angel to love. You're an angel.
suspect.